Questions are robust here, and the agenda is robust, but probably there is no topic that has garnered as much emotionality as the teacher and principal effectiveness. And we have with us tonight two of the people who are on the Regents Advisory Task Force. We welcome Dr. Jere, who is superintendent of the Bedford Central School District in Westchester, former superintendent of schools in Amherst Pelham Regional Schools, with Mike McDermott, principal of the Scarsdale Middle School, and also president of RASA, which is the Regional Association of School Administrators in New York State. And they're going to wrap up our presentations tonight on these complicated issues as it relates to principal and leader effectiveness. Again, welcome.
So Jerry, isn't it interesting that the new governor thinks we're both overpaid?
Yes, Mike.
This is the one thing we scripted.
It's more than a bit puzzling and probably disconcerting for our colleagues.
So let me see if I have it right. The governor has been in the job for just a few months, and he's already complaining about his salary. Sounds like a disgruntled state employee to me. By the way, how much is he making?
I have no idea, and it says here we can make up a figure, but I'm sure that it's not bad for a rookie governor.
You know the problem, Jerry? He just needs to be in a good union.
I think Mike deserves a round of applause for that.
I just want to mention one more thing. Walter, tomorrow I'm going to forward you an email I received just the other day. I was listening to the New York Times article. Yes. This email is fascinating, by the way. Actually, somebody decided, what if we paid teachers as if they were babysitters? As it turns out, when you do the calculations, it would cost more than the cap that they want to impose. And if the babysitter happens to have an advanced degree, it costs even more than the other babysitter. And you know what's interesting? In the process, those babysitters teach kids and kids learn, you know? So I will forward that to you tomorrow.
I'll pass it around.
Okay, good.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you. In this presentation, what we'd like to do is go through Chapter 103, which is the new law. We would like to spend a few moments talking about the Regents Task Force, which has been formed, about 50 people brought together over the course of a year to make recommendations to the Commissioner for regulations to implement this new law. And then throughout the presentation and then in the wrap-up, you'll hear our commentary and a few observations. To kick this off, what I'd like to do is ask you to turn to your neighbor and for 30 seconds, one person talking, explain why you became a teacher, why you got into your position, whatever it is right now in education. But if you're a classroom teacher, why did you become a teacher? If you're a board member, what drew you to education? 30 seconds, stay on topic, and then we'll flip-flop. So only one person talking, go. Okay, switch if the other person hasn't explained their answer, switch so the other person talks. Okay, thank you. If you could wrap that up, thank you very much. Very quickly, just a quick check-in. It's your mission. How many of you used the word mission when you were having that conversation? How many of you used the word kids when you were having that conversation? How many love of learning? How many to activate learning in kids? How about the future? Did you use the word future? How about preserving democracy? How about all of those other wonderful, wonderful reasons that got us into education? When we talk about school, we use a phrase in our place. It's called school the way it ought to be. Kids taking field trips, kids reading real literature, kids taking authentic assessments, kids getting their fingernails dirty outside in gardens, kids doing projects together, working together, all of those things that are memorable experiences in school that make a difference, and it really is school the way it ought to be. When we talk about school, and we also talk about the Superman movie, our answer is pretty simple, and we do think that the answer is pretty simple. The most important ingredient in a successful school is the teacher and any other adult that's working with kids. All the research you want to pull out there, end of the day, who's teaching the kids, how well are they doing, or do they know their kids, are they checking in on them? Second one, who's the principal of the school? Who's leading that unit of change where things happen? Doesn't happen in the central office, doesn't happen in Albany, it happens in the school. Leadership of the principal, teacher leadership, and teachers. Thirdly, a rigorous curriculum, and fourthly, a plan to put it all in place. Models for professional development and all those things that make a difference. As we go through this, I'd like you to think about why you got into education. I'd like you to think about the fact that school really ought to be meaningful, the way it ought to be, the way we remember it, and also those points that make a difference. Because now we're going to shift and talk about law.
And we hope at the end you'll still want to be a part of education.
So we'll get through some of this, and again, a lot of it is on the PowerPoint. We'll zip through some parts. So let's talk about this new law. For those of you that follow New York politics, I'm new to New York, only my third year. I've never seen a more dysfunctional legislature in my life. But somehow, in the middle of all that dysfunction, they managed to pass a law last May that changed our lives. Pretty remarkable. So what's in that law? First of all, it is a comprehensive system of multiple measures of effectiveness that would result in a single composite score for the evaluation of teachers and principals. And you'll be hearing us talk a lot about this in this presentation. 40% of that evaluation is based on student achievement. Are kids learning from this adult or these adults? The other 60% are those non-growth measures, observations, the APPR process as we know it. There are differentiated rating categories, 4 categories required by law now: highly effective, effective, developing, ineffective. We could go through some of these. There should be timely constructive feedback for our criteria, improvement plans. A key component to this is that some of these components will be put into regulations. However, some of them must be collectively bargained at the local level. Of course, there's training involved. There should be a process for appeals. Significant factor is that some of this is to be negotiated for professional development, compensation, and for promotion. The timeline is in the PowerPoint, and I want to zip right ahead into the task force. Mike?
Life on the task force, Jere. The task force consists of approximately 60 members representing various unions throughout the state, teacher representatives, principal representatives, superintendent representatives, a very broad spectrum of people. How did all of this happen? We talked about, Jere was mentioning about the law. Actually, all of this kind of took place over Sunday brunch, as we understand it, when the chancellor and the teachers union got together and formed a partnership, which isn't quite the same partnership anymore that it was at Sunday brunch. So we've got lots of different people in the room. Okay, I would say this, that the task force, there's a couple of points here about the task force. First of all, if you had any question that politics are alive and well in Albany, the task force would verify that for you, okay? There's a lot of coalition building that has gone on. In my work group, which is the 60% other measures for principals. We've had to form a coalition among 4 or 5 of us to thwart the forces of darkness and evil, otherwise known as the New York City Department of Education. But that's a reality. I'll talk more about that. At the same time, I have to say, I think Jere would confirm this, we didn't talk about this, but you get every time we meet a very strong sense of integrity from the people in the room. I think everybody, while they rail against the fact that this is happening and that we're going to have to do it, their perspective really is, then let's make it work, and let's make it work well. And let's do this for the sake of the kids we teach. So there's a strong sense of integrity that goes along with all of the politics and the coalition building. Just to, again, the New York City folks have a very different perspective on this than the rest of us. Just a quick example. We're on one of our conference calls, and the New York City Department of Ed person is really pushing their quality review process. The implication was, this is good for us. We've developed the system. We've been using it for 5 years. It should be good for the rest of the state. And she made a statement at one point about principal evaluations, and I said, if there are any New York City principals on this conference call, do you agree with the statement that was just made? And over the phone came a resounding no. So there's a system in place in the city that the principals there certainly, and I've gotten to know several of them, would like to see changed. Terminology is different too. At one point, I'm reading a document, and it talks about inspections, which in the city means principal evaluations in essence. And I said, you can't use that term outside of the city. It doesn't mean anything. An inspection in my school is the risk management people come in and inspect the building to make sure everything's safe. I said, so we've had to fight to get terminology changed, to get a perspective that the city system, is not the system that is necessarily what is good for the state, and that's where the coalition building has had to occur. We'll go through this quickly. We're on pretty much a 2-year timeline. Although the governor, wants to move this all up by a year. So you see that, again, extending the timeline and including, Lisa mentioned, we can talk a little further if we have time about the park assessments that are coming down the pike in 2014. So this is the structure, kind of the framework in which we're operating. There are 4 subgroups. I'll show you in a minute that there's a 5th that's been added. A committee on non-tested subjects, a committee on locally selected assessments, a committee on 60% non-growth measures for teachers. I've always been puzzled by the term non-growth, okay? I thought we were into growth, okay? And I'm on the committee on 60% non-growth for principals, and Jere is on the... Locally selected. Right, okay. So the task force is going to formulate recommendations which will go to the commissioner, and then the commissioner will report to the December Board of Regents. Now that timeline, there was a report in December, but the timeline has now been shifted, although the ultimate timeline of implementation July 1 is still very much in force. The commissioner made that very clear at our last meeting. There are other groups. There's input from the Center for Assessment. I don't think we've heard from them in a while, Jere. First meeting only, right. There's a committee on student growth composite scores, a committee on non-tested subjects. Professional development has not met, correct? They have not met. And again, the same kind of process here. If you notice on this one, new, This is a work group that's been formulated, a fifth work group that's been formulated out of, with members from the other work groups. That's basically, the shorthand is called the metrics work group, okay? Now, the most recent timeline is that the work groups are expected to give a report to the regents directly at their April meeting. Key points that require attention. I'm going to focus on a few of these. Who is a teacher? This is very important. We had a whole presentation on this. It's called Who is the Teacher of Record? Okay, and that's the technical terminology there. And the system in New York State now is capable of having multiple teachers of record. That is, who is the teacher who's responsible for this group of students, okay? Right now, SED is saying we're going to go ahead with the way it has been, which is there's one teacher of record. But the system is capable, as I said, of having multiple teachers of record. Now, this will get very interesting and dicey. Now, let me just explain, by the way. So, for example, if you're working together with a special education teacher, maybe with a push-in class, something like that, or team teaching, the system enables the state to designate that both of you, for example, are teachers of record in there. Right now, they're saying they're going with one. That doesn't matter right now, but if teachers' names start getting associated with scores, then it is going to make a big difference. And you watch as to how quickly one teacher wants to disown the fact that those are his or her kids, okay? I mean, so it has the potential to be really divisive. But that's where it's going to get interesting with teacher of record. Still a lot has to be talked about with the rating system or scoring bands. The appeals process is, again, I would say generally there are still more questions than answers in all of this. And everything we get from SED on this has a caveat at the top saying this is for discussion purposes only, is not to be distributed. So we can talk about it, but we don't write about it, okay? What's negotiated? What's in regulations? This is very critical. The commissioner himself at the last meeting spent quite a bit of time talking about that tension. Because, again, a lot of people say, well, it's all to be negotiated. Well, it has to be negotiated within the parameters of the statute and commissioner's regulations. And the commissioner's regulations have not been written yet. That's our job to recommend to him and hopefully to influence him about this. So he laid it out. How prescriptive should SED be in the regulations? How much should we turn over locally and allow to be negotiated? Well, if I was a betting person, I would put my money on the fact that it's going to be on the more prescriptive end of the scale. How far? I don't know if it'll go all the way to that, but it may. I mean, the Chancellor Emeritus stood up at the last Board of Regents meeting and said, let's face it, there's no way we can have 705 different teacher and principal evaluation systems in this state, okay? So I don't know if he was speaking for himself or if he was sort of set up to be a messenger for the regents. But that everybody noted that in the room. So again, on the scale of things, I think we're looking at probably more on the prescriptive side and less on the negotiation side. There are good points to that, but there are also, I think, other factors at work here. The rest, I think, is again, it's there. Task force format, we have monthly meetings. We're now up to 2 this month, though, in March. In between, so we've had presentations, Q&A, the subcommittees meet. This is the timeline. I would say this in terms of givens. If there was anything I could tell you was a given, we've had 3 presentations now on value added, okay? So if we had time, we could do a whole short presentation on growth models and the value added model. I can tell you this, we had 3 presentations all promoting value added, nothing to the contrary, so assume that it's coming our way. In between, we have conference calls with the various work groups that range from an hour and a half to, I've been on one that was 2.5 hours. And so the commitment of time has been significant. They've set up draft documents for our reviews. They've done surveys of us to see where we stand. And the SED staff are always working behind the scenes, and you have to, you know, just wonder sometimes what they're working on. Okay. Probably writing the regs already.
So, mindful of the time, we want to walk through the 5 topics, and which are the 4 subcommittees. Remember that word integrity that you heard earlier. Remember what you said earlier when you were talking about kids. Because on one hand, we have the integrity of public education. We have our aspirations for every child succeeding. And we know what good teaching is, and we know what good assessment is. And we know what professionalism is. And on the other hand, you've got laws, regulations, and all of those tightly controlled words that tries to put us in various boxes. And there's a real tension throughout this that you're going to be hearing. Because we want to do this right. We want to do this well. Accountability is essential if we're going to be moving forward in education. But we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is one component of the evaluation, which is 20% will be based on student achievement. It depends if you teach ELA and math or you don't. If you teach ELA and math, grades 4 through 8, next year the evaluation will include 20% based on state tests. Who is the teacher of record? You've heard about it. Just some background information, there is no committee on this topic. It's a done deal. You heard us talk about the no formal feedback, we had no formal feedback at the beginning. The National Center for Improvement for Educational Assessment, website is there, are the ones who are contracted to do the work, to do the value-added measurements, how students are doing, and then assign that to teachers. There was no RFP to select that group, but they've got the work. The most important thing that we can say here is that this phrase has been used, I don't know how many dozens of times. The train is already down the track. There are those that would love to go back and revisit this, debate it, discuss it. The train is down the track. The rest of the track hasn't been laid to get to the station, but the train is down the track. For those teachers who do not teach ELA or math grades 4 through 8, if you teach high school biology, you teach physical education, you too will be assessed based on student achievement, but there have to be other measures. Important note here is 80% of all the teachers in the state fall into this category. They do not teach English, language arts, or math in grades 4 through 8. Same question about who is the teacher of record. What about teachers who do pupil support? There's still more questions than answered. The key element here is that this committee is looking at options. Should they use other state tests? Should they use existing standardized assessments like ACT, Terra Nova, a Regents exam? What other approaches could be used to assess achievement of these kids? I'm on the committee for locally selected assessments, and I will ask you to indulge me as I read this sentence to you. This is in the law. 20% shall be based on other locally selected measures of student achievement that are determined to be rigorous and comparable across classrooms in accordance with the regulations of the commissioner and are developed locally in a manner consistent with procedures negotiated pursuant to the requirements of Article 14 of the Civil Service Law. I challenge any of you to tell me what that sentence means. We have debated it, we have read it over and over and over. Do we need to negotiate these, or do we not negotiate these? Can we select assessments, or do we locally develop the assessments? The committee has gone around and around with this.
And I would just add, Jerry, comparability is a big issue there too.
Exactly. So as we go into this, some of the things that we're looking at is what does the law say and what are the legal implications, but we have had some really good conversations seriously about how do we preserve the standard and then figure this out. The major question here on this issue of what's bargained and what not and what is not shows up more in this committee than anywhere else, because the bottom line is this: we do not collectively bargain the math curriculum. Why would we bargain the math test? And that's the key question. Will we be bargaining every single test that every student, every single assessment that every student takes in this 20% category, or do we only bargain the process and then a committee figures those out? Key question, still not answered. And this is the other key issue that we're dealing with. What happens when good local assessments, the essays that you assign the kids, the science experiments that you give the kids, all those great ways that you can say, kids are learning from me. I teach really well, and look at this, they're learning from me. What happens when those great assessments that you use for learning and to inform instruction and to inform your own professional growth become high-stakes tests, and your evaluation is dependent upon their performance on that science experiment? That's changing the face of education. A few other notes: there are also a look at some off-the-shelf types of assessments that could possibly use for this as well. So now we'll get into the 260% categories.
And just before that too, you know, one of the themes that we're hearing in the work groups is flexibility. And again, we're hoping that that sense of flexibility carries through. So, for example, in that previous slide, you know, one of the ideas is let's allow districts to have menus with options, or the other idea is options within requirements, or have clearly based this on the standards, but allow local flexibility with that. The other thing I'd add is, you know, everybody, this is another New York City Department of Education story, everybody looks at this and says, okay, 20% state assessments, 20% local assessments, 60% other, and that's a nice, neat divide. But we, in my work group, have, and this is, I think, been true to an extent because it has implications for the teachers, have constantly had to fight against taking student achievement measures from the first 40% and making them part of teacher and principal evaluations. Now, we have argued continuously against that, saying that's double jeopardy for teachers, that's double jeopardy for principals. You can't do that. You can't count them twice, because they would, some people would like to take flatten out the principalship, flatten out teaching, and just have it primarily be based on student achievement. And we know that teaching and leading are much more complex enterprises than that. So as you see here, again, the non-growth measure for teacher work group is trying to stress flexibility with the rubrics. I mean, there are going to be rubrics again, but within that there should be flexibility on the weighting elements, and define the scoring bands so you know what you're being rated on. Everything is going to be multiple measures. It's going to be true for principals, going to be true for teachers. And, you know, again, we're trying to push the idea that within multiple measures, those can vary from year to year, from situation to situation. So let me move into the group that I'm on. And again, one of the things I didn't know at the time, but I learned quickly, was if we look at reference to the Wallace Committee work, there had been work done for the 2 years previous to this, funded by the Wallace Foundation, that really looked at teaching and principal evaluation. Big debate on our group of the use of ISLIC or similar standards. ISLIC stands for the Interstate School Leaders Licensure Consortium. This work was done originally in, these are 6 standards for principal evaluation that were originally developed in 1996, revised in 2008. Again, we've been trying to promote a common set of standards for principal evaluation. We're getting a lot of pushback from, again, New York City folks about only using the ISLIC standards. You can count on, as a principal, that there are going to be multiple sources of feedback, students, parents, self-evaluation, peers, the whole gamut there. What we've been trying to promote is the idea of not all every year, okay? 2, in a given year with some choice of those 2. Big focus on measurable outcomes, and again, we're trying to make sure this is not just so strictly defined that it's all just based on student achievement. Flexibility for experience in years as a leader. It's interesting, that discussion, because we've tried to make the point that there's a big difference as to whether you are a beginning principal, a principal who has experience but is new to a school, and a veteran principal like myself who's been in my position for 17 years. You should not paint those 3 different principles with the same broad brush. Because, for example, if we look at the area of leadership and management, I made the point that, listen, as a beginning principal, if you don't manage your building, you fail. There's no question about it. You could be the most visionary person in the world, but as I said in front of the task force, I said, if the streets aren't plowed, or I said, if, as New York City folks could understand, if the streets aren't plowed and the trains don't run on time, you fail. So there has to, we've really been pushing for the idea that there's a context of experience here that has to be taken into account. And these 5 elements here at the bottom are most likely going to be there in the end, I think.
So just a few reminders as we wrap it up. As you pay attention to this, it's March. This work is to be completed in a few months. It's to be implemented this summer. There are still more questions and answers. There are varying legal opinions on a number of points. Please be reminded there are no decisions yet, no matter what you read, what you hear, at least in the public, there have been no decisions made yet. And no matter what this committee does, the final recommendations are in the purview of the commissioner. So just a few critical points that we're monitoring. When I went to Teachers College, one of the things that was ingrained in me is looking at school culture. And you can think about culture as either technical and illusory, checklists and following the procedures and the illusion of success, or it can be substantive, it can be constructive, it can be meaningful. How will this law be implemented? Will it be technical and illusory, or will it be substantive? So as we talk about this, we hope the folks making those final decisions keeping in mind what it takes to implement change in a classroom, in a school building, and in a school district. That it has to be manageable. Our phrase has been, it has to be doable. It's a great law, it's a great idea, but it's not a research project. It has to be implemented. It has to be practical. There's a reason why we hope that there is a lot in regulation so that it's not too loosely interpreted. Timing is important, of course, quality is. The reality of what goes on in collective bargaining, and now are we going to add a whole new dimension to collective bargaining while we're talking about all of those other tough topics? Are we also going to be talking about assessments? Cost, yet another unfunded mandate in spite of Race to the Top, and also the concept of equity across the state. Or will the rich get richer? Those who have the methodology to implement all of these wonderful innovations in assessment and videotaping and professional development, will they continue to excel, and will those others will have to be dependent on other sources, and the bar will remain low for them? So we have to keep that in mind. And so our questions are, what matters most? A district's capacity to develop and implement the direction, accomplish the goals and initiatives, and to ensure quality at the end of the day. that we hope everybody understands the magnitude and the implications of this change on individuals and on the system as a whole. Recognizing and respecting the day-to-day reality to implement a quality evaluation. We calculated the number of hours that it takes to do one teacher evaluation in the course of a year. Now you add dimensions of test scores and all of these other pieces. There's not enough hours in the school year to do that. So it has to be manageable. Ongoing professional development is the key to everything, and that's got to be in this. The bottom line is ensuring that this new work improves student learning, student performance, and professional practice. And one last question for you.
Yeah. So our question is an expression of that tension I expressed earlier. To what extent do you believe the new state system of teacher and principal evaluation should be prescribed by SED in the interest of uniformity and consistency of standards versus locally negotiated flexibility that takes into account local context, past practice, and effective current processes and procedures?
Well, thank you very much. Jerry and Mike, thanks so much for that tremendous presentation. What we'd like to do now, because I know it's been a long day, we're going to follow up on each of these topics in a more in-depth way. However, we'll take 15 minutes for those people who want more dessert or coffee. You kind of move up closer here. We're going to ask our whole panel to go on the stage for just about 15 minutes along with Dan. And they will interact with each other on some of these issues, and they'll also interact with you, those who want to have your questions answered on any of these topics. So we'd ask the panel, the 6 panelists who have been spectacular, and Dan to kind of go on the stage, and those people who can stay for a few moments, we'll wrap things up in a summative fashion by the dialogue with you and the dialogue with the panelists together. We have a couple of mics right here, and then we have the
and Jere. A number of friends of mine who are superintendents have asked this question. If a teacher is rated, on the scale, there's 4 different scales. As I understand it, there'll be 100, measurement of 100 scales. People will get evaluations like 75, 80, 90, that kind of thing, and then ineffective all the way to highly effective. If a teacher gets ineffective, a 1, and gets a 75 or an 80 on the compilation of all these scores, and she's in the 5th grade or 6th grade, why in the world would I place my child and permit my child to be placed in allegedly an ineffective teacher who got a 1 and is still there in the school? And will that open up lawsuits and so on? A number of superintendents have raised this question because they feel they'll be left holding the answer to that question. Yes. Feel free to use the microphone.
Yeah, I just want to add to that because, on the task force people, when that issue has come up, people said to me, well, you're in Scarsdale, you don't have to worry about that. I said, are you kidding? I said, we will have parents making judgments about teachers on the basis of statistically insignificant scores. I said, and that's the way it will play out. So I said, it's just like my English department chair says, oh boy, this is, look at what I'm under here. I said, my butt is in the same sling as yours is. So, so that, it's going to play out in a very similar way, I think, no matter where we are, if that's what happens. I would also say this. We had a presentation on the teacher of record, as I mentioned, and it was done by a researcher. So I used the opportunity to say, in front of the commissioner and Deputy Commissioner King, I said, listen, you're the researcher, you may not be able to answer this, but there are people in this room who could. I mean, if you know me, I'm a little slightly irreverent, so I use the opportunity to say, does SED have a position right now on releasing the scores with teachers' names attached to them? I said it very directly. Now, he chose to answer that, the commissioner didn't. He said SED does not have any intention of releasing scores with teachers' names attached. But if that information is foiled, we will have to consult with legal counsel about how we proceed. So that's a big but.
Did they look at it that would come under Freedom of Information Act? Somebody could go and look.
Well, it's how it happened in Los Angeles. It's how it happened in New York City. And by the way, the New York City teachers, as you probably know, lost the first round in court on that. That doesn't bode well.
Okay, any of the other panelists want to add? Yes, Kane.
I just wanted to say that when we talk about collegiality, you can't imagine anything that would destroy more the thought of teachers working together and sharing than putting one against the other that way. We all know that there's a lot of improvement to be had, and there's a lot of excellence out there. What we need to do is share it and grow it in the ways we're talking about. But I agree that to put the names would be antithetical to everything we're talking about.
Jere, do you have any thoughts on that question, Jere? Mike said it pretty well. Okay.
Walter, I just wanted to comment on one slide. I thought it read, and correct me if I'm wrong, the train has left the track. The thought I had was the train has left the station, but has it run off the track?
There is no track yet. That's been our metaphor. There is no track yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. One interesting thought I had, and it happened in Tribeca in one of the elementary schools. When Mike was talking about Scarsdale, where my daughter teaches at this building actually, that their scores are so high, if they're going to have to show growth, the question remains that there may be what is called statistically a ceiling effect. And therefore, because it's very difficult to prove growth from year to year, how would they actually prove growth? You know, and teachers are being evaluated, and Mike will be evaluated on the growth. In Tribeca, you probably remember this infamous incident. The school went from being an A, because New York City had used the grades, to an F in 1 year. And as it turned out, they discovered that they could not show growth in that school because they were high to begin with, therefore, i.e. the ceiling effect statistically.
Walter, if I could, just a sidebar that Dan might very much appreciate. 4 years ago, Scarsdale asked to participate in the Pisa, an international test only given to 15-year-olds. We were allowed to participate in science with the understanding that our results would not count in the overall, report. Here's what's interesting. If Scarsdale were a country, our results would have made us #1 in the world. 4 years later, not even country, but the only scores that would have been higher 4 years later were Shanghai. So it can be done. It illustrates what your point was, Dan, about where you are and what your population is. Because when you start to isolate out and create a population that's very similar to Finland or Shanghai, you can produce the same result. Sure.
Are there other questions to any of the panelists, either in the Common Core area? We didn't talk about mathematics, but math is there. I can give you a reference if you want someone who's a guruess, I guess you could say, of mathematics. She's a professor at Fordham, and she worked with us when we were, as Esther was saying, we were involved with the ELA until they realized the money is with the Common Core. And she's just spectacular. I could give anyone that reference to her, and she'd be happy to do an analysis. Yes. Yes.
In this climate, there's only one area I think that money is appearing, and it was mentioned at the very beginning. Our friend Bill Gates has put some money together, and he's going to have all these videos of effective teaching and improved teaching. Dr. Lino, some people talked about videotaping. Where do you think that's going? Is that going to be a problem? Is that going to help us? Is it going to hurt us? Because those effective teachers are American teachers that he's videotaping around.
Neil, can I just say that I don't know, I've read many of the Bill Gates initiatives, but that's not new. Many schools have been using that technique, having teachers videotape themselves, asking for their permission, and we developed, in where I was principal, a videotape library. And so teachers were able then to take the videotapes home, the newer teachers, they could see them multiple times in the privacy of their house, and this was the kind of thing, this was the kind of growth that happened when collegial teams worked together. So I don't think we need to have Bill Gates do it. I mean, there's a lot good going on. We need to look, within and compare our excellent practices, because it can have phenomenal results, and that's been all recordable.
Can I raise that question to maybe a scary level in a knowledge-based economy? Right now, I'll begin with something silly. My daughter can watch her puppy, Zuchi, on the internet from school at puppy camp, okay? Some of our teachers in private school have the right to access the classroom where their children is and actually look into the classroom and follow their children. Will there be a day when any parent is allowed to look inside of the classroom where their child is? And what are the constitutional issues there, a parental right versus a teacher's right to privacy? Can a public school classroom be a private place?
And Neil, I want to go to your point about Bill Gates and Ford Foundation and all of these big mega bucks that seems to be shaping what the educational future is going to be like, which is what I'm thinking you're saying. One of the sites is the Common Core.org, which is an organization that is funded by all those mega dollars that are being very prescriptive in the type of either curriculum maps or instructional practices they'd like to see happen. And I think that Dan really illustrated the point of the power of money to the degree that is shaping so much of this. And I think that's a scary proposition in some way as well. But I think Lisa mentioned it earlier. I find it so critical that we all become extraordinarily awakened and very observant and very critical and voice what we perceive is happening. Because I'm afraid that we might just, and I appreciate my colleagues who are fighting so hard the good fight, but the idea of drinking the Kool-Aid, is just a strong potential. And but the money, in my mind, sometimes is the Kool-Aid itself.
Yeah, relative to that, yeah, you're right on target, by the way, you may not know it. I was at a meeting 2 weeks ago with Tom Kane, who's a Harvard professor who specializes and he works almost full-time for the Gates Foundation. And he was demoing for us a camera that's kind of shaped like this thing that you put in the middle of a classroom, okay, and it videos everything that's going on in the class 24/7. So again, it's like you're the principal now and you're sitting in your office and you have a camera in every classroom. Big Brother is watching and his name is Bill Gates.
Dan, I think I see the security director back here. I think our college has that, right? I went by the security office and they're watching everybody in there, like Macy's, Yes. Yes, and then Jennifer, yeah.
I haven't heard much said about where does special education fit into
Great question.
And I don't want to open up an entirely different, but now in this day when, really inclusion is being encouraged and there are inclusive classrooms and there is co-teaching, and this is coming up in July, as of July, as far as the evaluation, where is special education, alternate assessment, and all of this now within the whole global consideration of education?
Is there any of the panelists, Jere?
That question's come up often, and for all intents and purposes, the response has been pushed off a year because of that question of who is the teacher of record. And to get this thing off the ground, they said the primary classroom teacher is the teacher of record for ELA, math, and in 4th through 8. So there's time to answer that, but it does need to be addressed. And then there have been discussions about, do Do you say who is the primary teacher? Do you divide up the number of students and cut it in half? Do you divide up the amount of time that a student is with a teacher? They're asking lots of questions on how to calculate it, but there are no answers yet. But it is out there, it'll be addressed, and similarly on the local assessments, are there other ways to measure how those individual students are learning from the special ed teacher?
And I assume that also applies to English language learners.
Everybody.
Dan?
Just to make one point relative to all of this, which I think is I love this because I'm going to be making speeches and referencing this whole thing that's happening here in New York. Because here's the thing. We have all of these issues that we need to fix in education. And we heard from experts on the instructional side, and we heard from experts on how you can make it more effective and more efficient. And we have all of this knowledge and all of this expertise and all of these things that ought to be done and should be done. And what the heck do they have us doing? Rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Wasting our valuable time and resources to come up with a system of evaluation that isn't going to do a darn thing for the profession, isn't going to improve instruction, but it's just going to waste time and money. It's a shame.
Yes, there's two more questions, and then we'll wrap up because of the time. And yes, Jenna.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring something out that I think is important. Consistency in the curriculum is very much important, and I think Connie, your whole idea about maps is very important, but it's the how of the curriculum where there are so many differences. Bill Gates is putting his money into college board type philosophies and things like that, and I think that's where we need to really look at. What does active learning look like? It looks different to many different people. It's the how that's getting us into trouble, and that's where the achievement is going to make a difference. The what is important, but we've got to look at the how in education.
Yes, Connie.
Jennifer, you're right. I think that when we talk about, we need to have a shared technical culture of what outstanding teaching is. You have the curriculum, but then the instruction in the classroom makes it or breaks it. And so my point again of looking at what else, and we all know there's so much research on what makes an excellent lesson. And by the way, some of the old research that was done by Madeline Hunter way back still has major implications. And we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater to use that. But there are effective instructional strategies that we need to make a shared technical culture in the school. That's it.
The very last question, Charles.
I guess this question is really directed to the task force. I'm looking at not so much technical illusory, but what has there been done regarding the development of a database that integrates the student records and the teacher professional development? I think that's where, that's where that would tie together for professional development. But if it's based on the student record, you can tie several years into it and look at it more of a cohort and not be directed so much to the teacher. Has that been looked at?
It's being addressed, and sort of in response to one of the earlier questions, one of my favorite thoughts is that Orwell was right, he just had the year wrong. Everything will be connected. Student test scores, we heard this earlier. Student performance on anything that can be measured and standardized will be collected. That will be tied to a teacher who also now can have their identity collected, identification number collected. It's not just to see if kids are learning from those teachers. When I was in Massachusetts, the key element there was, now let's find out where they went to college and see which colleges and universities are churning out the teachers that are getting these results on student tests. As long as it's CIF compliant, you can connect any dot you want with it when it comes to data. So the only good news is they'll be swimming in data and won't know what to do with them. But everything you're anticipating, I would expect it.
Any other reflections on that? Okay, we said that'll be the last one. You haven't had a chance to.
Thank you.
Yes.
What interventions are in place for schools that do fail, principals that do fail, teachers that do fail? Is there a committee for that?
Kate, do you,
No,
maybe Dan wants to address this at the national level, or is there somebody want to weigh in on the state level?
There's nothing at the state level on that. We know, though, that 2 years of ineffective ratings for a principal sets in motion, you know, if the Board of Education wants to do it, an expedited 3028 dismissal procedure. So, yeah, I mean, the whole issue of appeals on evaluations is still very much up in the air as well. That nobody's gotten down to the nitty-gritty of all of this. You know, it's my belief that the primary beneficiaries of all of these changes are going to be attorneys.
But will they be happy though? I can't really thank enough you for coming, certainly. What a spectacular panel of experts when you think about it. These are really busy people, like so many people, and they took time out of their day to be with us. And we particularly want to thank Dan for coming such a long distance. And we thank the college, certainly the Office of Alumni and College Relations. And it was a collaborative effort, getting back to Connie's point about collaboration. And we'll try to follow up with these, maybe in depth, where we just spend in-depth time with each of these topics. We wanted to give you kind of an overview today. That was our intent, to alert you to it. And I'd like to end maybe with this, this thought I had, and I wrote it down. The educator's collective voice needs to be the first and most vociferous one heard in the academic areas of instruction, curriculum, and innovation. A voice that speaks with clarity, conviction, and common sense. After all, you are all educating the next generation of parents, leaders, scientists, designers, doctors, contractors, military personnel, as well as so many other young people. Thank you so much for coming, and again, thanks to our panel.